Cinderella, the secret war of two worlds. Pest. Hey, you there. Yes, you. Come closer. I've got a secret to tell you, but you've got to promise to keep it between us. Are you ready? Okay, here goes. Everything you think you know about Cinderella? It's all wrong. The glass slipper, the pumpkin carriage, the handsome prince? That's just the surface of a story so deep, so magical, and so earth-shatteringly important that it could change the fate of not just one kingdom, but two entire worlds. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another Cinderella story? I've heard it all before. But trust me, my friend, you haven't heard anything like this. This tale has been passed down through generations, whispered in the shadows of ancient forests and hidden in the corners of dusty libraries. It's a story of magic beyond your wildest dreams, of secrets that could topple empires, and of a girl who discovered she was so much more than anyone ever imagined. But here's the thing, once I start telling you this story, I won't be able to stop. And once you start listening, you won't be able to turn away. With every word, you'll feel the magic growing stronger, pulling you deeper into a world you never knew existed. You'll find yourself holding your breath, your heart racing, as you discover truths about our world and yourself that you never imagined possible. So, I have to ask, are you brave enough to hear the real story of Cinderella? Are you ready to question everything you thought you knew about magic, about power, and about the very fabric of reality itself? Because let me tell you, by the time this tale is done, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Still with me? Good. Then settle in, my friend. Get comfortable. Maybe light a candle or two, trust me, it'll help set the mood. And whatever you do, don't look away. Because the story I'm about to tell you, it's not just Cinderella's story. It might just be yours, too. Now, let's begin. The hidden magic. Picture a kingdom that gleams under a constant sky of stars, where the very air seems to shimmer with possibility. This is where our story begins, in a grand manor house that once echoed with laughter and love. Can you see it? The sprawling gardens, the marble fountains, the windows that catch the starlight like diamonds? Now, zoom in closer. There, in the shadows of this once glorious home, is a young woman named Cinderella. But forget the rags and the cinders you might expect. This Cinderella has eyes that flash with hidden fire, hands that bear the calluses of hard work and secret training. She moves with a grace that speaks of power barely contained. You see, beneath the burdens she carried, beneath the cruel treatment of her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella harbored a secret. In the quiet moments between her endless chores, in the stolen seconds of peace she found in hidden nooks of the nearby forest, Cinderella had discovered something extraordinary about herself. She could hear the whispers of the wind, telling her secrets of far-off lands. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, sensing the ebb and flow of ancient magics. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the starlight was just right and her concentration perfect, she could make the tiniest spark of light dance on her fingertips. It was magic, raw and untamed, and it was hers. But magic, as Cinderella was quickly learning, was a dangerous thing to possess in a kingdom that had long ago turned its back on the old ways. So she kept it hidden, a secret flame burning in her heart, waiting for the moment when it could finally burst free. Little did she know, that moment was coming sooner than she could have ever imagined. The invitation. The day everything changed started like any other. Cinderella rose before dawn, her bones aching from another night spent sleeping on the cold hearth. As she went about her morning chores, feeding the chickens, drawing water from the well, stoking the fires. She felt a strange electricity in the air. The wind whispered more urgently than usual, and even the surly old cat that haunted the kitchen seemed on edge. "Something's coming," Cinderella murmured to herself, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting to see storm clouds gathering. But the sky remained clear, the stars twinkling innocently overhead. It wasn't until midday, as Cinderella was elbow-deep in soap suds, scrubbing the manor's endless floors, that the something finally arrived. The thundering of hoofs echoed through the courtyard, followed by an authoritative knock at the grand front door. From her position on the floor, Cinderella had a perfect view as her stepmother, Lady Tremaine, swept past, her face a mask of cold curiosity. Cinderella's stepsisters, Anastasia and Drizella, peeked out from behind a curtain, their eyes wide with excitement. The door swung open to reveal a royal messenger, resplendent in the kingdom's colors. In his hands, he held a scroll tied with a golden ribbon. Hear ye," the messenger proclaimed, his voice ringing through the manor. "By decree of their majesties, the king and queen, all eligible maidens are hereby summoned to attend a grand ball at the royal palace. The prince, newly returned from his adventures across the seas, seeks a bride to rule by his side and usher in a new era of prosperity for our kingdom." Cinderella's heart skipped a beat. The prince returned? She had heard whispers of his exploits, tales of daring escapes from pirate ships, of lost treasures found in ancient temples, of diplomatic victories in far-off lands. But there had always been an air of mystery about him, a sense that there was more to his travels than met the eye. As Lady Tremaine accepted the invitation with a gracious, if slightly predatory, smile, Cinderella's mind raced. This wasn't just any ball. Something about it felt significant, important in a way she couldn't quite put her finger on. Later that evening, as her stepfamily excitedly discussed gowns and jewels and dance steps, Cinderella retreated to her tiny attic room. There, in the fading light, she pulled out a small, worn book, her mother's journal. Its pages were filled with cryptic writings and strange symbols that Cinderella had never been able to decipher. But now, as she traced her fingers over the faded ink, something extraordinary happened. The words began to shimmer and change, rearranging themselves before her very eyes. On the night of the celestial alignment, she read, her heart pounding, "When the veil between worlds is thinnest, a choice will be presented. The fate of the kingdom, nay, of two kingdoms, hangs in the balance." Cinderella's eyes widened. The ball was scheduled for the very night mentioned in the journal. This was no coincidence. She knew then that she had to attend, not for the prince or the promise of a better life, but for answers to questions she didn't even know she had. As she clutched the journal to her chest, a spark of magic danced between her fingers, stronger than ever before. Whatever was coming, Cinderella knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same again. Unexpected allies. The days leading up to the ball were a whirlwind of activity in the manor. Cinderella's stepsisters preened and practiced, trying on gown after gown, while Lady Tremaine watched with a calculating eye, no doubt already planning how to secure a royal marriage for one of her daughters. Cinderella, meanwhile, worked harder than ever. But now there was a new purpose to her movements, a fierce determination burning in her eyes. Every spare moment was spent poring over her mother's journal, trying to decipher its secrets. The more she read, the more she realized how little she truly knew about her mother, about her own powers, and about the very nature of the world she lived in. On the night of the ball, as the rest of the household prepared to leave, Cinderella retreated to the garden. There, in a hidden corner overgrown with wildflowers, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I need help," she whispered to the night air. I don't know how, but I need to get to that ball." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft breeze rustled through the flowers, carrying with it the faint scent of magic. Cinderella opened her eyes to find she was no longer alone. Standing before her was a woman unlike any Cinderella had ever seen. Her hair shimmered with starlight, her eyes held the wisdom of ages, and her smile made Cinderella feel like anything was possible. "Hello, my dear," the woman said, her voice like the chiming of distant bells. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." Cinderella's heart raced. Are you my fairy godmother?" she asked, the words feeling strange on her tongue. The woman's laugh was like music. "I've been called that, yes. But I am so much more. And so are you, Cinderella. So much more than you can possibly imagine." With a wave of her hand, the fairy godmother conjured a shimmering gown that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of the night sky. But even as Cinderella marveled at its beauty, she noticed something else, a subtle pattern in the sparkles, forming symbols that matched those in her mother's journal. "This isn't just about looking pretty for a ball, is it?" Cinderella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The fairy godmother's eyes twinkled. "Oh, my clever girl. No, this is about so much more. Tonight is not just about the prince, dear. This is your adventure, and it will be one you'll never forget." As she helped Cinderella into the gown, the fairy godmother pressed a small, ornate key into her hand. "Use this when the time is right," she whispered. "And remember, the greatest magic lies within you." With another wave of her hand, a pumpkin transformed into a magnificent carriage, mice became horses, and a lizard turned into a coachman. But these were no ordinary transformations. Each creature seemed to glow with an inner light, their eyes holding a wisdom far beyond their new forms. As Cinderella stepped into the carriage, the fairy godmother's final words echoed in her ears. "The path ahead is dangerous, my dear. But I have faith in you." We all do. Before Cinderella could ask who we were, the carriage was off, whisking her towards a destiny she could never have imagined. The Ball of Secrets. The royal palace was a vision of splendor, its spires reaching towards the star-studded sky, its windows ablaze with light. As Cinderella's carriage approached, she felt a thrill of excitement and fear. She was no longer just a girl in rags, she was a mystery waiting to be unraveled, a force of nature disguised in silk and starlight. The grand ballroom was a sea of color and movement, filled with the kingdom's elite in their finest attire. But as Cinderella entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned, not just because of her beauty, but because there was something magnetic, almost otherworldly about her presence. As she descended the grand staircase, Cinderella's eyes scanned the room. She wasn't just looking for the prince, she was searching for clues, for anything that might help her understand the greater purpose behind this night. And then she saw him. The prince stood at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by admirers, but looking somewhat detached. His eyes met Cinderella's, and in that moment, a jolt of recognition passed between them. Not of faces, but of souls. As if drawn by an invisible force, they moved towards each other. The crowd parted, whispers following in their wake. When they finally stood face to face, the prince bowed deeply. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying a hint of relief, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. "May I have this dance?" Cinderella curtsied, her heart racing. "You may, your highness." As they began to dance, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. They moved together with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, as if they'd been partners for 1,000 years. Their conversation, too, was far from ordinary. They spoke of distant lands, hidden realms, and the mysteries of the kingdom, things that no ordinary girl would have known, things that went far beyond the prince's public adventures. "You're different," the prince murmured, his eyes alight with curiosity. "You see beyond the glitter and gold, don't you?" Cinderella's heart raced. "There's more to this night than dancing, isn't there?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The prince's smile faltered for a moment. "More than you could imagine," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "But it's dangerous knowledge. Are you sure you want to know?" Before Cinderella could answer, a commotion near the grand windows caught their attention. The stars outside were shifting, aligning in a pattern that made Cinderella's breath catch in her throat. It matched perfectly with a diagram in her mother's journal. The celestial alignment had begun. Suddenly, the ornate key in Cinderella's pocket began to grow warm. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that the time to use it was now. "I have to go," she said urgently to the prince. His eyes widened in understanding. "You have the key," he whispered. "Go. Quickly. I'll create a distraction." As Cinderella turned to leave, the prince caught her hand. "Wait," he said. "I don't even know your name." She smiled, a mix of mystery and mischief in her eyes. "Let's just say, I'm the girl who's about to change everything." With that, she was gone, slipping away into the shadows as the clock began to strike midnight. Behind her, she heard the prince's voice rise, drawing the attention of the ballroom as he announced a special performance. Cinderella ran, her glass slippers echoing on the marble floors. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but something magic, instinct, destiny was pulling her forward. Finally, she found herself in a secluded corridor, facing an ancient door that seemed out of place in the opulent palace. In its center was a keyhole that perfectly matched the key she carried. With trembling hands, Cinderella inserted the key. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. And then everything changed. The realm beyond. The door swung open silently, revealing not a room, but a swirling vortex of light and color. Without hesitation, Cinderella stepped through, leaving behind the world she knew and entering a realm of pure magic. The first thing that struck her was the vastness of it all. She stood on what seemed to be a floating island, one of many suspended in an endless sky filled with stars and swirling nebulae. Bridges of light connected some islands, while others drifted in isolation. The air itself seemed alive, shimmering with possibilities. As Cinderella took her first tentative steps, she realized her ball gown had transformed. She now wore an outfit that seemed to be made of living starlight, practical yet ethereal. At her waist hung a small pouch containing her mother's journal, now glowing with an inner light of its own. "Welcome, daughter of two worlds," a voice echoed around her. Cinderella turned to see a being that defied description, part human, part celestial, all magic. "We've been expecting you." "Who are you?" Cinderella asked, her voice steady despite the wonder and fear coursing through her. "Where am I?" The being smiled, a gesture that sent ripples of light across the sky. "I am a guardian of the veil, one of many who watch over the boundary between your world and ours. As for where you are, this is the ethereal realm, the source of all magic in your world." As the guardian spoke, images began to form in the air around them, scenes from history, both familiar and strange. Cinderella saw great battles, moments of discovery, and quiet acts of everyday magic. For millennia, the guardian continued, there has been a delicate balance between our worlds. Magic flows from the ethereal realm into your world, nurturing life, inspiring creativity, and occasionally manifesting in individuals of great potential. The guardian's gaze fell pointedly on Cinderella, and she felt a surge of warmth flow through her. "Your mother was one such individual," the guardian said softly. "She was a bridge between worlds, a protector of the balance. And now, that mantle has fallen to you." Cinderella's mind reeled. "But I don't understand. Why me? Why now?" The guardian's expression grew serious. "Because the balance is in grave danger. A darkness is growing, one that threatens to devour both our worlds. The alignment of the stars has opened a window of opportunity for good or for ill. You, Cinderella, have the power to tip the scales." As if on cue, a distant rumble shook the floating islands. Cinderella stumbled, catching herself on a strangely shaped tree that seemed to be made of crystal. "What was that?" she asked, her heart racing. The guardian's face was grim. "The first tremors of what's to come. We don't have much time. You must prepare." And so began Cinderella's crash course in interdimensional magic. The guardian led her from island to island, each one holding new wonders and challenges. She learned to harness the raw magic of the ethereal realm, shaping it with her will and emotions. On one island, she faced illusions that tested her perception of reality. On another, she learned to communicate with beings of pure energy. With each challenge, Cinderella felt her powers growing, her confidence soaring. But even as she marveled at her new abilities, a nagging question persisted. "What about the prince?" she asked the guardian during a rare moment of rest. He seemed to know something about all this. "What's his role?" The guardian's eyes twinkled mysteriously. "Ah, the prince. He has his own part to play in this grand design. But that, my dear, is a story that must unfold in its own time." Before Cinderella could press further, another tremor shook the realm, stronger this time. In the distance, she could see dark clouds gathering, shot through with ominous flashes of red lightning. "It's time," the guardian said solemnly. "Are you ready to face your destiny?" Cinderella took a deep breath, feeling the magic coursing through her veins. She thought of her mother, of the prince, of the two worlds hanging in the balance. "I'm ready," she said, her voice ringing with determination. With a wave of the guardian's hand, a portal opened before them, swirling with a mix of starlight and shadow. "Remember," the guardian said, "the greatest magic lies within you. Trust in yourself and in those who fight alongside you." Cinderella nodded, squaring her shoulders. With one last look at the wondrous realm that had become her training ground, she stepped through the portal and into the unknown. The shadows rise. The world Cinderella stepped into was barely recognizable as the one she had left. The grand ballroom of the palace, once a vision of light and elegance, now lay in semi-darkness. The glittering chandeliers flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The guests, frozen in place like statues, seemed suspended between moments a macabre tableau of a celebration interrupted. And there, in the center of it all, stood the prince. But he was not alone. Surrounding him was a writhing mass of shadows, tendrils of darkness that seemed to drink in what little light remained. At the heart of this darkness stood a figure that made Cinderella's blood run cold, Lady Tremaine, her stepmother, but transformed. Gone was the cold, calculating woman Cinderella had known. In her place stood a being of pure malevolence, her eyes glowing with an unholy light, her form shifting and pulsing with stolen magic. "Ah, there you are, my dear stepdaughter," Lady Tremain's voice echoed unnaturally, a cruel smile twisting her features. "How kind of you to join us for the final act." The prince's eyes met Cinderella's, a mix of relief and worry in his gaze. "Cinderella," he called out, his voice strained as he fought against the shadows holding him. "I'm sorry. I tried to hold them off, but—" "Silence!" Lady Tremaine hissed, the shadows constricting around the prince. She turned her attention back to Cinderella. "Did you really think you could keep the truth from me? That I wouldn't discover the power hidden within my own household?" Cinderella's mind raced. How long had Lady Tremaine known? Had all those years of cruelty been a cover, a way to keep Cinderella downtrodden and ignorant of her true potential? "It matters not," Lady Tremaine continued, as if reading Cinderella's thoughts. "Your mother's power, the prince's ancestral magic, the very essence of this kingdom, it will all be mine. And with it, I will reshape both worlds in my image." The shadows surged forward, reaching for Cinderella with grasping, hungry tendrils. But Cinderella was ready. With a gesture, she called forth the magic she had learned in the ethereal realm. Light burst from her hands, pushing back the encroaching darkness. "No," Cinderella said, her voice ringing with power. "This ends now." What followed was a battle unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Cinderella and Lady Tremaine clashed in a spectacular display of light and shadow. Spells crackled through the air, reality itself seeming to warp and bend around them. Cinderella fought with everything she had, drawing on every lesson, every ounce of power she had discovered. But Lady Tremaine was strong, fueled by years of bitterness and the corrupted magic she had stolen. As they fought, the very fabric of the world began to fray. Cracks appeared in the air, offering glimpses of the ethereal realm beyond. The frozen guests flickered like candles in the wind, their forms becoming translucent. "Don't you see?" Lady Tremaine cackled as she deflected another of Cinderella's attacks. "It's too late. The barrier between worlds is collapsing. Soon, everything will be consumed by chaos." Cinderella faltered, the weight of the situation crushing down on her. How could she stop this? How could she save not just the prince, not just the kingdom, but two entire worlds? And then, in the depths of her despair, she heard it. A whisper, so faint she almost missed it over the din of battle. It was her mother's voice, speaking words she had read in the journal, but only now understood. The greatest magic lies not in power, but in love. In connection. In the bonds that tie all things together. In that moment, Cinderella understood. She had been fighting alone, seeing this as her burden to bear. But she was not alone. She never had been. With a renewed sense of purpose, Cinderella reached out, not with her magic, but with her heart. She felt the prince's unwavering faith in her, the hopes and dreams of every person in the kingdom. She felt the flow of magic from the ethereal realm, the delicate balance of two worlds. And for the first time, she fully embraced her role as a bridge between realms. Light exploded from Cinderella, not just from her hands, but from her entire being. It was not the harsh, combative light of before, but a gentle, all-encompassing radiance. It touched everything, the frozen guests, the cracking barriers between worlds, even the shadows that Lady Tremaine commanded. "No!" Lady Tremaine shrieked as the light washed over her. "What are you doing?" "What I was always meant to do," Cinderella replied calmly. "Restoring balance." The light grew brighter, and as it did, the shadows began to recede. The cracks in reality slowly knit themselves back together. The guests stirred, color and life returning to their forms. Lady Tremaine screamed as the stolen magic was purged from her system. The shadows cloaking her form dissipated, leaving behind a woman who looked older and more vulnerable than Cinderella had ever seen her. As the light finally faded, Cinderella stood at the center of the ballroom, no longer dressed in her magical gown, but in her simple servant's dress. Yet somehow, she had never looked more regal. The prince, freed from the shadows, rushed to her side. "Cinderella," he breathed, taking her hands in his. "You did it. You saved us all." Cinderella smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "No," she said softly. "We did it. All of us, together." As the guests slowly came back to their senses, confused murmurs filling the air, Cinderella knew that this was only the beginning. There would be explanations to give, truths to reveal, a kingdom to rebuild. But for now, as she stood hand in hand with the prince, feeling the restored flow of magic between realms, Cinderella allowed herself a moment of pure joy. She had discovered her true self, faced impossible odds, and emerged victorious. The real adventure, she realized, was just beginning. Echoes and revelations. In the days that followed, the kingdom buzzed with rumors and whispers. Tales of the mysterious girl who had saved them all from an unseen threat spread like wildfire. Some spoke of magic, of battles between light and shadow. Others dismissed it as mass hysteria, a shared hallucination brought on by bad wine or a prankster's spell. But for those who had been in the ballroom that night, who had felt the touch of true magic and seen reality itself bend, there was no denying that something monumental had occurred. Cinderella found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. No longer a forgotten servant, she was now a guest of honor in the palace. The prince rarely left her side, his eyes shining with a mix of admiration and shared understanding every time he looked at her. It was on the third day after the ball that the king and queen called for a private audience. As Cinderella entered the royal study, she felt a flutter of nervousness. This was the moment of truth. The king, a jovial man with a bushy beard, beamed at her. "My dear," he said warmly, "it seems we owe you a great debt of gratitude. Though I must admit, I'm still not entirely sure what it is we're grateful for." The queen, a serene presence at his side, laid a calming hand on his arm. "What my husband means to say is that we would be most appreciative if you could shed some light on the events of the ball. Our son has told us, well, some rather extraordinary things." Cinderella took a deep breath. With a nod from the prince, who stood supportively at her side, she began to speak. She told them everything of her hidden magic, of the ethereal realm, of Lady Tremaine's dark plot and the battle that had ensued. As she spoke, she could see the disbelief in the king's eyes slowly transform into wonder. The queen, however, showed little surprise. When Cinderella finished her tale, it was the queen who spoke first. "I always wondered if the old stories were true," she said softly. "Tales of a time when magic flowed freely between realms, when our ancestors walked hand in hand with beings of pure energy." The king sputtered, turning to his wife in astonishment. "You mean you knew about all this?" The queen smiled mysteriously. "I suspected. There have always been signs for those who know how to look." She turned her gaze to Cinderella. "But never, in all my years, did I imagine I would see the rise of a true bridge between worlds." Cinderella blinked in surprise. You know about the bridges?" "Oh yes," the queen nodded. It's a legacy passed down through the women of the royal family. We've long been guardians of the old knowledge, keeping it safe until the time was right. Her eyes twinkled as she looked between Cinderella and her son. And it seems that time has finally come. The implications of the Queen's words hung heavy in the air. Cinderella felt the weight of history, of destiny, settling on her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt right. The king, having finally found his voice again, cleared his throat. "Well then," he said, clearly trying to sound more confident than he felt, "I suppose the question is, what do we do now?" It was the prince who answered. "We rebuild," he said firmly. "We reforge the connection between our world and the ethereal realm. And we do it the right way this time, with wisdom, with caution, and with the understanding that magic is a responsibility as much as it is a gift." Cinderella nodded, warmth blossoming in her chest at the prince's words. "It won't be easy," she added. "There will be those who fear magic, those who might try to misuse it. We'll need to proceed carefully." "And what of your stepmother?" the queen asked gently. "What became of her after the battle?" Cinderella's heart clenched. In the chaos that followed her victory, Lady Tremaine had vanished. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I fear we haven't seen the last of her." The king stood, his face set with determination. "Then we shall be vigilant. We will search for her and for any others who might pose a threat to our kingdom and to this new era of magic." As the conversation continued, plans being made and strategies discussed, Cinderella felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had ever known. This was her destiny, not to be a princess in a fairy tale, but to be a protector, a teacher, a bridge between worlds. Later that evening, as she stood on a balcony overlooking the kingdom, the prince joined her. "A lot to take in, isn't it?" he said softly, taking her hand in his. Cinderella nodded, leaning into his warmth. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "A part of me still feels like that girl sleeping in the cinders, dreaming of a better life." The prince squeezed her hand. "And now you're living that better life," he said. "Though I imagine it's not quite what you pictured." Cinderella laughed. "Not at all," she agreed. "It's so much more." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with determination. "We have so much work to do." The prince nodded, his face serious, but his eyes alight with excitement. "Indeed we do. Rebuilding the kingdom, reintroducing magic, searching for your stepmother, not to mention planning a royal wedding." Cinderella's breath caught in her throat. "A wedding?" The prince smiled, dropping to one knee. From his pocket, he produced not a ring, but a small, glowing crystal, a piece of the ethereal realm. "Cinderella," he said softly, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've opened my eyes to a world of magic and wonder. Will you do me the honor of continuing this adventure together? Will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to Cinderella's eyes. This was not the fairy tale ending she had dreamed of as a child. It was something far greater, far more real, and far more magical. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times, yes." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the crystal between them pulsed with light. Above them, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the ethereal realm itself was celebrating their union. In that moment, Cinderella knew that while one chapter of her story was ending, an even greater one was just beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. But with love in her heart, magic at her fingertips, and a kingdom ready to embrace a new age of wonders, Cinderella was ready to face whatever came next. After all, she was no longer just Cinderella. She was a bridge between worlds, a guardian of magic, and a beacon of hope for two realms. And her story? It was far from over. Whispers in the shadows. As the kingdom celebrated the engagement of Prince Charming to the mysterious and magical Cinderella, darker forces were stirring in the forgotten corners of the realm. In a dank cave far from the glittering lights of the palace, Lady Tremaine huddled in the shadows, her once regal form now twisted and diminished. "Curse that wretched girl," she hissed, her voice echoing off the damp stone walls. "She may have won the battle, but the war is far from over." A low chuckle emanated from the darkness behind her. "Such fire, even in defeat. I can see why the shadows were drawn to you, my lady." Lady Tremaine whirled around, her eyes straining to pierce the gloom. "Who's there? Show yourself." From the depths of the cave emerged a figure that seemed to be made of living shadow. It shifted and swirled, sometimes appearing almost human, other times taking on monstrous forms. Only its eyes remained constant, two pinpricks of cold, blue light. "I am known by many names," the figure said, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "But you may call me the Shadowmancer. And I believe, Lady Tremaine, that we may be of use to each other." Lady Tremaine's eyes narrowed. "Go on," she said cautiously. The Shadowmancer circled her, tendrils of darkness reaching out to caress her face. "You tasted true power, didn't you? The raw magic of the ethereal realm. It coursed through your veins, made you feel alive in ways you never thought possible." It paused, leaning in close. "And now you crave it again, don't you?" Lady Tremaine shuddered, but didn't pull away. "Yes," she whispered. "More than anything." "Then listen closely," the Shadowmancer said. "The girl, this Cinderella. She is more important than you know. She is a bridge, a conduit between our world and the ethereal realm. And now that she has embraced her power, the barriers between worlds are weaker than they've been in centuries." Lady Tremaine's eyes widened in understanding. "You mean—" "Yes," the Shadowmancer hissed gleefully. "With the right ritual, performed at the right time, we could tear open a permanent portal between realms. Imagine it, my lady, an endless font of magic, ours to command." A slow, wicked smile spread across Lady Tremaine's face. "And what would you have me do?" The Shadowmancer waved a shadowy hand, and an image appeared in the air before them, a map of the kingdom, with several locations glowing with an eerie light. "These are ancient sites of power," it explained. "Long forgotten by most, but still humming with latent magic. We'll need to charge them, awaken the old energies." "And how do we do that?" Lady Tremaine asked, her voice eager. The Shadowmancer's form seemed to grin, though it had no visible mouth. "With fear, my dear lady. With darkness and pain and despair. We'll strike at the heart of the kingdom, remind them of the terror that lurks in the shadows. And as they cower in fear, their negative emotions will feed the ritual." Lady Tremaine nodded, her mind already racing with plans. "And Cinderella? The prince?" "Leave them to me," the Shadowmancer said. "I have plans for our dear bridge. After all, every light casts a shadow, and I intend to make hers the darkest of all." As Lady Tremaine and the Shadowmancer plotted in their dark cave, miles away in the royal palace, Cinderella woke with a start. Her heart raced, cold sweat beading on her forehead. "What's wrong?" Prince Charming asked, sitting up beside her, his voice thick with concern. Cinderella shook her head, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of her nightmare. I'm not sure," she said. "I saw shadows, felt a chill I haven't felt since the night of the ball. Something's coming, Charming. Something dark." The prince wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," he promised. Cinderella nodded, taking comfort in his warmth. But as she gazed out the window at the star-filled sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge was yet to come. The awakening. The weeks following Cinderella's engagement to Prince Charming were a whirlwind of activity. As news of magic's return spread throughout the kingdom, reactions were mixed. Some celebrated, seeing it as a return to a golden age of wonder and possibility. Others were wary, fear of the unknown breeding suspicion and distrust. Cinderella found herself at the center of it all, working tirelessly to bridge the gap between the magical and non-magical communities. She established a school of magic within the palace grounds where those with latent abilities could learn to control and nurture their gifts. The prince supported her every step of the way, using his influence to smooth over political tensions and rally support for this new era. But even as they worked towards a brighter future, shadows were gathering at the edges of the kingdom. It started small at first, whispers of strange occurrences in outlying villages. Crops withering overnight, livestock falling ill with unknown maladies, children waking screaming from nightmares of monsters in the dark. Cinderella felt each incident like a physical blow. Her connection to the magic of the realm had grown stronger, and with it, her sensitivity to disturbances in the natural order. "Something's wrong," she told the prince one evening as they pored over reports from the outer territories. "These aren't just random events. There's a pattern here, a purpose." The prince nodded grimly. "I've noticed it too. It's as if something's feeding on the fear these incidents are causing." Cinderella's blood ran cold as she remembered her lessons in the ethereal realm. "Or someone," she whispered. Before the prince could respond, the door to their study burst open. A guard rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Your Highnesses," he gasped, "you must come quickly. The sacred grove in the heart of the forest, it's under attack." Cinderella and the prince exchanged a quick glance before springing into action. They had been working to reawaken the old places of power throughout the kingdom, strengthening the connections between their world and the ethereal realm. The grove was one of the most important sites, a nexus of natural magic that had stood for centuries. As they raced through the palace and into the forest beyond, Cinderella could feel the wrongness in the air. The usual song of magic that hummed through the trees was discordant, shrill with pain and fear. When they reached the grove, the sight that greeted them was one of devastation. The ancient trees were withering before their eyes, their leaves turning black and crumbling to ash. At the center of the clearing, where a crystal-clear spring had once burbled with life-giving water, now bubbled a viscous, dark liquid that hissed and steamed as it touched the earth. And there, standing amidst the destruction with a triumphant smile on her face, was Lady Tremaine. "Welcome, my dear stepdaughter," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "So kind of you to join us for the festivities." Cinderella stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What have you done?" she demanded. Lady Tremaine laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Cinderella's spine. "Oh, this is just the beginning, my dear. A taste of what's to come." As she spoke, the shadows around her seemed to deepen, swirling and coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. Cinderella felt a wave of cold dread wash over her as she recognized the presence she had felt in her nightmares. "Allow me to introduce my new associate," Lady Tremaine said, gesturing to the shadow being. "I believe you two have a lot in common." The Shadowmancer stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Cinderella with an intense, hungry gaze. "Hello, little bridge," it hissed. "How wonderful to finally meet face to face." Cinderella stood her ground, drawing on the magic within her. Light began to glow around her hands, pushing back the encroaching shadows. "Whatever you're planning," she said firmly, "we will stop you." The Shadowmancer's laugh was like ice cracking. "Oh, my dear, you misunderstand. We're not here to fight you. Not yet, anyway." It gestured to the corrupted grove around them. This is just a message. A reminder of what lurks in the dark, waiting to be unleashed." Lady Tremaine stepped forward, her eyes glinting with malice. "The age of light and goodness is coming to an end, Cinderella. Darkness is rising, and this time you won't be able to stop it." Before Cinderella or the prince could react, the Shadowmancer waved its hand. A vortex of darkness opened behind them, and they stepped back into it, vanishing from sight. As quickly as it had appeared, the portal closed, leaving Cinderella and the prince alone in the devastated grove. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a groan of ancient wood and a rumble of earth, the corruption began to spread. The dark liquid from the spring seeped outward, withering grass and flowers in its wake. The very air seemed to grow thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Cinderella knew they had to act fast. Closing her eyes, she reached deep within herself, calling upon the pure magic of the ethereal realm. She felt the prince's hand in hers, lending her his strength and support. Together, they began to push back against the corruption. Light poured from Cinderella's hands, meeting the encroaching darkness in a spectacular clash of energies. The prince, drawing on his own latent magical abilities, focused on containing the spread, creating barriers of protective energy around the edges of the grove. For what felt like hours, they fought against the tide of darkness. Slowly, inch by inch, they reclaimed the sacred ground. The spring gradually cleared, the trees began to straighten, new leaves budding on their branches. By the time the last vestiges of corruption were purged, Cinderella and the prince were exhausted, their clothes soaked with sweat and streaked with dirt. But the grove was saved, wounded but alive. As they surveyed their work, Cinderella's heart was heavy. "This was just the beginning," she said softly. "They'll strike again, and next time we might not be so lucky." The prince nodded, his face grim but determined. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "We'll increase our efforts to reawaken the old sites of power, strengthen our defenses. And we'll find them, Cinderella. We'll stop them before they can do any more harm." Cinderella looked out at the recovering grove, then up at the star-filled sky beyond the canopy. She could feel the ethereal realm, so close yet still just out of reach. Whatever Lady Tremaine and the Shadowmancer were planning, she knew it threatened not just their kingdom, but both worlds. "We will," she agreed, her voice gaining strength. "Whatever it takes, we will protect our people, our kingdom, and the balance between realms." As they made their way back to the palace, plans already forming in their minds, neither Cinderella nor the prince noticed the tiny seed of darkness that remained buried deep in the heart of the grove. A seed that pulsed with malevolent energy, waiting for the right moment to sprout and grow. The battle for the fate of two worlds had only just begun. Echoes of the past. In the days following the attack on the sacred grove, an air of unease settled over the kingdom. Despite Cinderella and Prince Charming's best efforts to project calm and control, whispers of dark magic and ancient evils spread like wildfire among the populace. Cinderella threw herself into her work, dividing her time between strengthening the kingdom's magical defenses and continuing her lessons with those who showed magical potential. But even as she taught others to harness their gifts, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. It was during one of her rare moments of quiet reflection, as she sat in the palace library surrounded by ancient tomes and scrolls, that a solution presented itself. "Your Highness," a soft voice called. Cinderella looked up to see an elderly woman standing before her, her white hair tucked neatly under a maid's cap. "Forgive the intrusion, but I couldn't help overhearing your frustrations earlier." Cinderella smiled warmly at the woman. Since taking up residence in the palace, she had made a point of getting to know all the staff, from the highest-ranking advisors to the humblest of servants. "It's no intrusion at all, Mrs. Potts. Please sit. What's on your mind?" The old woman settled into a chair across from Cinderella, her eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "It occurs to me, dear, that in all your searching for answers about the future, you might be overlooking a valuable resource about the past." Cinderella leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Potts smiled. "Why, the royal archives, of course. Generations of kings and queens have kept detailed records of their reigns, including accounts of magical occurrences and threats to the kingdom." Cinderella's eyes widened. "Of course. Why didn't I think of that before? But I thought the archives were sealed, accessible only to the royal family." "Ah, but you're to be royal yourself soon enough, aren't you?" Mrs. Potts said with a wink. "I'm sure if you asked the Queen, she'd be more than happy to grant you access. After all, knowledge of the past might just be the key to saving our future." Filled with renewed purpose, Cinderella sought out the Queen. To her surprise, the older woman seemed to have been expecting her request. "I was wondering when you'd ask," the Queen said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She removed a delicate golden key from around her neck. "The archives have been waiting for you, Cinderella. I think you'll find the answers you seek within their walls." The royal archives were located deep beneath the palace, accessible only through a hidden passage behind the throne room. As Cinderella descended the winding stone staircase, torches flickering to life as she passed, she felt a sense of awe and trepidation. The archives themselves were a vast chamber filled with row upon row of shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. Books, scrolls, and artifacts from every era of the kingdom's history filled the space, each carefully preserved and catalogued. But it wasn't the sheer volume of information that took Cinderella's breath away. It was the magic. The entire chamber thrummed with it, a subtle vibration that she felt in her very bones. This place was more than just a storehouse of knowledge. It was a nexus of the kingdom's magical heritage. As she wandered the aisles, her fingers trailing over ancient spines and weathered parchments, Cinderella felt drawn to a particular section. The books here were older than the rest, their titles written in a script she didn't recognize but somehow understood. One volume in particular caught her eye. Bound in midnight blue leather and inlaid with silver stars, it seemed to call to her. As she pulled it from the shelf, a shower of sparks danced in the air around her. Opening the book, Cinderella found herself looking at a detailed account of a conflict that had taken place centuries ago, a war between light and shadow that had very nearly torn the kingdom apart. As she read, her heart began to race. The parallels to their current situation were undeniable. A dark force rising from the shadows, corrupting the land and turning people against each other. A group of heroes led by a powerful magic user with a unique connection to the ethereal realm. But it was the final pages of the account that truly shook Cinderella to her core. They spoke of a ritual, a last, desperate attempt to banish the shadows and restore balance to the world. The details were vague, but one thing was clear: the ritual had come at a great cost. The leader of the heroes, the one called the Star-Blessed, had sacrificed herself to complete it. Cinderella closed the book, her mind reeling. Was this the fate that awaited her? Was self-sacrifice the only way to defeat the darkness threatening their world? She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. No, there had to be another way. She refused to believe that history was doomed to repeat itself so cruelly. With trembling hands, she returned the book to its shelf. As she did so, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic hidden behind the tome. Curiosity piqued, Cinderella carefully extracted the object, a small, intricately carved silver box. The moment her skin made contact with the box, a jolt of energy surged through her body. The lid sprang open, revealing a delicate crystal pendant that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Cinderella gasped as she recognized it, a shard of the ethereal realm, similar to the one Prince Charming had given her as an engagement token. A slip of parchment fluttered to the floor. With shaking hands, Cinderella picked it up and read the faded script. To the one who comes after, the bridge between worlds. Know that sacrifice comes in many forms. The shadows would have you believe that only through loss of life can victory be achieved. But remember this, true power lies not in what we give up, but in what we fight to protect. The pendant you now hold is both key and conduit. Use it wisely, and may the light guide your path. Estrella, the Star-Blessed. Cinderella clutched the pendant to her chest, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Hope warred with fear, determination with uncertainty. The weight of destiny pressed down upon her shoulders, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a mantle of responsibility. She slipped the pendant around her neck, feeling a surge of warmth as it settled against her skin. In that moment, knowledge flooded her mind, understanding of magics long forgotten, of the true nature of her power as a bridge between worlds. The quiet of the archives was suddenly shattered by the sound of alarm bells ringing throughout the palace. Cinderella's head snapped up, her body tensing for action. Something was wrong. She raced up the stairs, the pendant bouncing against her chest with each step. As she burst into the throne room, she was met with a scene of chaos. Guards rushed about, shouting orders and preparing for battle. In the center of it all stood Prince Charming, his face grim as he issued commands. "Cinderella," he called out as he spotted her. "Thank the stars you're here. We're under attack." "Lady Tremaine?" Cinderella asked, already knowing the answer. The prince nodded. "And she's not alone. Reports are coming in from all over the kingdom. Shadow creatures are rising, corrupting everything they touch. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Cinderella's mind raced, connecting the dots between what she had read and what was unfolding before her. "It's happening again," she murmured. "Just like centuries ago. They're trying to tear open a permanent portal between our world and the ethereal realm." Prince Charming's eyes widened in understanding. "If they succeed, both worlds will be consumed by darkness," Cinderella finished. She touched the pendant at her throat, drawing strength from its soft glow. "But we won't let that happen. We can't." As if in response to her words, the pendant flared with light. Cinderella gasped as new understanding coursed through her. She turned to the prince, her eyes shining with newfound purpose. "Gather our strongest magic users," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We need to reawaken the ancient wards around the kingdom. It won't stop them entirely, but it will slow them down and give us time to prepare." Prince Charming nodded, a proud smile crossing his face despite the dire circumstances. "And what will you do?" Cinderella's gaze turned to the window, where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. "I'm going to face my stepmother. It's time to end this, once and for all." As the prince rushed off to carry out her orders, Cinderella closed her eyes, reaching out with her newfound senses. She could feel the corruption spreading across the land, a creeping darkness that threatened to engulf everything she held dear. But beneath it, pulsing with defiant light, she felt the heart of the kingdom, the hopes and dreams of its people, their love and their courage. She opened her eyes, determination etched on every line of her face. This was what she was fighting for. This was what made any sacrifice worthwhile. "I'm coming for you, stepmother," she whispered to the gathering storm. "And this time, the shadows won't save you." With a flurry of magic, Cinderella transformed her simple dress into battle attire, a suit of armor that shimmered with starlight, a cloak that seemed to be woven from the night sky itself. At her hip appeared a sword, its blade etched with runes that glowed with ethereal fire. As she strode from the palace, magic crackling around her like barely contained lightning, the people stopped and stared in awe. Gone was the shy servant girl, the blushing bride-to-be. In her place stood a warrior, a protector, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. Cinderella raised her sword high, its light piercing the shadows that threatened to engulf the kingdom. For our world, for the ethereal realm, for the balance between light and dark, she called out, her voice carrying to every corner of the land. "We fight!" And with that battle cry ringing in the air, Cinderella charged forward to meet her destiny, ready to write the next chapter in a story that had been centuries in the making. The final battle for the fate of two worlds had begun, and at its heart stood a girl who had once slept in cinders, now risen to become the most powerful force for good her kingdom had ever known. The shadows trembled, for Cinderella, the bridge between worlds, had finally embraced her true power. And nothing would ever be the same again.